The rain hitting the concrete of Portland's northeast Burnside Street didn't fall so much as it hammered, a relentless November assault that turned gutters into rivers and drove every reasonable person indoors. Sergeant Lydia Crane was not in a position to be reasonable. She was crouched in the shallow overhang of a shuttered pawnshop, her knees pulled tight to her chest, watching the Belgian Malinois pressed against her side with the particular alertness that fear gives to dying things. Aegis, 62 pounds when he'd been healthy, a blur of muscle and precision that had cleared rooms in Kandahar and Bagram, and a dozen places that didn't show up on sanitized briefing maps, now shivered against her with the full weight of 11 months of running. His ribs showed through the coat that had once been glossy and close. His right front leg, shattered by vehicle shrapnel on a base in Djibouti 8 months before their world collapsed, had healed badly without proper veterinary follow-up. He walked with a limp that got worse in the cold. Right now, it was very cold. Lydia pulled off her olive-drab field jacket, the last thing she owned with an Air Force patch on the shoulder, and draped it over the dog's back. The rain immediately soaked through her thermal undershirt. She didn't flinch. She'd stopped feeling temperature the same way other people did a long time ago. They had been on the run for 11 months. 11 months since Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Kincaid had stood in the doorway of the base veterinary unit at Ramstein Air Base in Germany with his hands folded behind his back and explained, with the clipped efficiency of a man who genuinely enjoyed paperwork, that K9 Unit Aegis had been designated for euthanasia due to chronic injury, behavioral unpredictability secondary to blast-related trauma, and declining combat effectiveness. He'd used the word asset. He'd used the phrase liability mitigation. He'd looked directly at Lydia the entire time and never once treated her like a person in the room. She had 14 hours. She used 12 of them trying to submit emergency adoption paperwork through the approved channels. She spent the remaining 2 cutting Aegis's tracking chip out of the back of his neck with a sterile blade and walking off the base with 62 pounds of traumatized Belgian Malinois in her arms and absolutely nothing else. The Air Force had not been understanding about this. Within 48 hours, she was facing charges of misappropriation of government property, desertion of post, and unauthorized possession of a classified tactical canine. Within a week, she'd been dishonorably discharged in absentia. Within a month, something else had started hunting her, something that didn't wear a uniform, but moved like it once had. They burned through 4 states and 11 cities. Portland was the end of the line. Lydia knew it the way you know things you don't want to know, in the stomach, before the brain catches up. Aegis let out a low, wet sound that wasn't quite a whimper and wasn't quite a cough, and Lydia felt it in the back of her teeth. "I know, boy." She pressed her palm flat against his ribs, feeling the unsteady flutter of his breathing. "I know." A pair of shoes appeared at the edge of the overhang. Not boots. Shoes. Brown leather Oxfords with thick rubber soles, the kind a careful man wore in wet weather. They stopped. "That dog is dying." The voice was dry as old paper and twice as certain. Lydia didn't look up. "We're fine. We'll move." "Move where?" "There's nothing open on this block after 9. A pause. "And that is a Tier 1 tactical harness on that animal. I know what that means." She looked up. The man standing outside the overhang was old, genuinely old, the kind of age that has stopped being an abstraction and become a geological fact. He had white hair trimmed with military neatness, a long charcoal overcoat with a velvet collar, and a face that had been deeply lined for so long the lines had become distinguished. He held a black umbrella over himself with his left hand, and a silver-handled walking cane with his right, and he regarded her from behind wire-rimmed glasses, with the calm, neutral expression of someone who has presided over rooms where people said terrible things, and found nothing particularly surprising anymore. "We don't want any trouble," Lydia said. I live 3 blocks from here. The old man tilted his chin up the street. My housekeeper left a pot of soup on the stove this morning. The dog needs warmth and protein, and so do you, though you'll argue the second point longer than the first. He looked at Aegis. His leg is going to seize in this cold if you make him walk much further. Lydia's hand moved to the compact flashlight on her belt. Old reflex. Who are you? Edmund Foley. He said it without ornamentation, the way people say things they've been saying for a long time. I was a federal judge for the 9th Circuit for 26 years. I retired 8 years ago. I live alone, I do not own a firearm, and I have absolutely no interest in your military status. His pale grey eyes held hers. But I know which unit trains Belgian Malinois handlers for joint operations, and I know that the Air Force doesn't dishonorably discharge a decorated handler for stealing a dog, unless someone very much wants that handler discredited. The silence between them held nothing but rain. Aegis made the decision for her. The dog pressed his nose against Lydia's wrist, the old signal, the one she'd built into him in another life, and then turned to look at the old man with the patient, cautious attention of an animal that has learned to read people better than most people read each other. Lydia stood, gritting through the screaming in her exhausted legs, and scooped the dog into her arms. Lead the way, she said. The house was a narrow 3-story Victorian on a street of similar houses, most of them subdivided into apartments decades ago. This one had not been subdivided. It sat behind a low iron fence under 2 massive Douglas firs and glowed amber from inside, like something out of a different century. Edmund Foley held the door open without ceremony and stood aside. The warmth was physical, like walking into another element. The house smelled of old books and wood smoke and something actually cooking, not canned. The entry hall was lined with framed photographs that Lydia's eyes moved across automatically, the surveillance habit that never turned off. A law school graduation, a younger Edmund in judicial robes, a woman with dark hair and an open, easy smile appearing in a dozen photographs at a dozen different ages. Put him on the mat by the radiator, Edmund said, closing the door behind them. Not directly against it, slow warming. Lydia set Aegis down on a thick wool mat near the cast iron radiator. The dog stretched out with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than his lungs, and his eyes slid shut. Edmund disappeared into the kitchen and returned with 2 bowls, one wide and low, filled with shredded chicken in warm broth, one regular, filled with the same thick vegetable soup. He set the dog's bowl within reach and handed Lydia hers without asking what she preferred. Small amounts, Lydia said, already crouching beside Aegis, breaking the chicken into smaller pieces with her fingers. I assumed. She fed the dog with one hand and ate her own soup standing up, watching Edmund settle into an upholstered chair across the room. He didn't speak while they ate. He watched with that same neutral expression, his cane propped against the chair arm, his hands folded in his lap. When Aegis had eaten and laid his head heavily on Lydia's knee with his eyes shut, she finally looked at the old man directly. You said you knew which unit trains handlers like me. I did. That information isn't public. No. Edmund reached into the breast pocket of his overcoat and produced a small folded card. He held it out. My daughter served in that unit. She retired 6 years ago and went to work for a federal contractor with a security clearance that gave her access to certain financial transaction records. His voice remained level. Precisely level, the way voices get when enormous grief has been compressed into a very small space over a very long time. She was killed 14 months ago. Lydia took the card. It was a death notice printed on plain white paper and folded many times. The name on it read Claire Foley, age 31. Ruled a traffic accident, Edmund said. Hit and run on a 2-lane highway in rural Virginia. No witnesses. The investigation was closed in 9 days. He paused. My daughter was not the kind of person who had traffic accidents. She was the kind of person who found discrepancies in numbers and followed them until she understood what the numbers were hiding. Lydia looked up from the card. Her hands had gone very still. What was she hiding? Edmund reached beneath the side table and produced a manila envelope, worn soft at the corners from handling. He set it on the low table between them. "Open it." The envelope contained documents, some official, some clearly photographed copies with heavy redaction. The top page was a financial audit summary with the header partially obscured, but one line sat unblocked. Diversion of seized materiel funds, Operation Crossbar Phase 2. Recipient entities, classified. Approving authority, classified. Below it a personnel record. The photograph was Colonel Stuart Kincaid. "My daughter was a forensic financial analyst," Edmund said. "She spent 4 months tracing what appeared to be a systematic embezzlement of funds seized during joint task force operations. Money that was supposed to be frozen as evidence, instead routed through a series of shell logistics companies into private offshore accounts. The total, as of her last compiled report, was approximately $47 million. Lydia's jaw tightened. Kincaid. She identified him as the approving authority 2 days before she was killed. Edmund's grip on his cane whitened briefly, then released. She was scheduled to deliver her findings to a special counsel's office in Alexandria that Monday. She never made it. She never made it. He looked at the sleeping dog on the floor. "What happened to your unit in Djibouti, Sergeant Crane? The incident that injured your dog was not an accident." The words landed like something physical. "What are you talking about?" 6 weeks before your dog was injured, your unit was tasked with securing a facility that Kincaid's logistics network was using as a transfer point. Your team's helmet camera footage and your dog's vest-mounted sensor array recorded approximately 40 seconds of data inside that facility before you took fire and evacuated. Edmund leaned forward, his pale grey eyes finding hers with a precision that had nothing to do with his age. The sensor array embedded in a Tier 1 tactical harness doesn't just detect explosives, Sergeant. It records atmospheric compound data. What Aegis's vest captured in that facility was consistent with the presence of financial documents, electronic storage media, and, according to the independent forensic analysis my daughter commissioned before she died, the DNA signatures of 3 individuals who have since been reported missing. The room felt like it had contracted around her. Lydia looked down at the tactical harness, still strapped to Aegis's body. The harness she had never removed because it was the only thing keeping his injured shoulder stable. The harness she had been carrying across 11 months and 4 states without knowing what it held. "The sensor log is encrypted in the vest's onboard memory," Edmund continued. "Standard operational protocol, it uploads to base servers on return from deployment. But if the handler goes AWOL before the upload completes, the data stays local." Kincaid reviewed the helmet footage from that patrol and realized what the vest had captured. He needed the dog and the vest destroyed before anyone thought to extract the memory module. The euthanasia order. Lydia's voice had dropped to something barely above a breath. Filed by Kincaid's office. The injury gave him the rationale. The actual motive was the 37 gigabytes of operational sensor data stored in that harness. Edmund sat back. "You didn't steal government property, Sergeant Crane. You walked off a base carrying the only surviving evidence of a $47 million embezzlement operation and the probable cause record for 3 murders. And Kincaid has been hunting you across 4 states ever since." Lydia sat completely still for a long moment, her hand resting on Aegis's back. "How long have you known about me?" 8 months. My daughter's files, the ones she hadn't yet transmitted to the special counsel, were among her personal effects. I spent time since then trying to locate someone I could trust to decode them. What I found instead was the trail of your movements. Edmund held her gaze. You have been remarkably difficult to catch. Not difficult enough. Someone's been closing in. Last 2 weeks I've felt it. He nodded slowly. 4 days ago, a man who does not appear on any government payroll checked into a motel in Beaverton under a borrowed name. I have a contact at the county assessor's office who monitors certain flag patterns for me. He was asking questions about a woman traveling with a large dog. Lydia was already on her feet. Edmund held up one hand. Before we get to that, we need to talk about the vest. Her hand went to Aegis's harness automatically. What about it? He hesitated. For the first time, something moved behind the controlled expression, a flicker of something that cost him. The harness memory module needs to be extracted by someone who knows what they're doing. But there is a more immediate problem. He drew from the manila envelope one last document, a technical report dense with terminology. Before you left Ramstein, Kincaid's people attempted to disable the evidence through the dog. They introduced a slow-acting corrosive compound into the harness lining, designed to degrade the memory module from outside over approximately 12 months and simultaneously cause enough systemic inflammation in the animal wearing it that attending veterinary staff would attribute his declining health to the existing injury. Lydia stared at him. Aegis has been getting sick. Her voice was flat. His gums. I thought it was malnutrition. It's partly malnutrition, but the compound in the harness lining has been causing low-grade toxic exposure since the day you left Germany. The timeline on that report suggests his organ function will begin to deteriorate significantly within the next 2 to 3 weeks. Edmund's voice did not waver, but his knuckles around the cane were bloodless. We need to remove the harness, neutralize the compound, and extract the memory module tonight. I have someone who can do it, a retired military forensic technician who served with my son-in-law before Claire died. He lives 20 minutes from here. He has been waiting for this call for 8 months. Lydia looked at Aegis. The dog was watching her with his amber eyes half open, the old expression, the one that had nothing to do with commands and everything to do with trust, the expression that said, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." She thought about the harness she'd been clutching across 11 months like a lifeline. She thought about what had been slowly leaching out of it into the animal pressed against her every single night while she slept. Something broke open in her chest that she hadn't known was locked. "Call him," she said. Edmund crossed to the side table and lifted the handset of a landline telephone. A deliberate choice. Lydia understood immediately, no cellular signal to intercept, and dialed from memory. He had barely finished speaking when the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a gradual fade, complete darkness, immediate and total. And then, from somewhere at the back of the house, the soft, precise sound of a window being forced. Lydia moved before the sound finished registering. She pressed Aegis flat to the floor. Stay, the old hand signal, the one no amount of running had erased from either of them, and gripped the tactical flashlight from her belt. She didn't turn it on. In darkness, light was a liability. Edmund, she registered in the dim ambient glow from the street, had not panicked. He was standing at the bookcase beside the fireplace, removing something from the shelf. Not a book, a compact radio, military grade. He turned a dial with practiced hands and lifted it to his mouth. She didn't have time to ask. She moved into the hallway. The operative came in through the study at the rear of the house, exactly where Edmund had mentioned the deadbolt. He moved with the measured quiet of someone trained well past caution into pure instinct. Night vision monocular mounted over his right eye. Suppressed pistol in a two-hand grip. He wasn't rushing. He'd done this before. Lydia pressed into the gap between the hallway closet and the wall and waited. He passed within arm's reach. She gave him 2 steps, enough for the geometry to work, and then she was on him. The flashlight caught him across the monocular housing, with a sound like a bat connecting with a fence post. The optic cracked and wrenched sideways, smashing the lens frame against his cheekbone. He staggered, but he was good. He didn't drop the pistol. He pivoted, fired twice into the wall where she'd been standing a second earlier. She grabbed his gun wrist with both hands and drove her knee up into his elbow, felt the joint bend the wrong way. He screamed, short, bitten off, and the pistol hit the floor. She swept his ankle and took him down hard against the baseboard. He tried to come back up. He was bigger than her, and he'd been sleeping in a motel bed and eating real meals, and he tried to use every advantage. She didn't let him find his feet. She pinned his gun arm under her knee, got her forearm across his throat, and held until his eyes went from furious to unfocused to absent. She was still crouched over him, breathing through her teeth, when Edmund's voice came from the parlor doorway. Sergeant Crane. She looked up. Edmund stood in the doorway, the compact radio in his hand. From its speaker, small and tinny but unmistakable, came the sound of multiple vehicles, radio chatter, and a voice calling out federal agents in the flat, practiced cadence of people who actually were. I've had standing contact with the special counsel's office since my daughter died, Edmund said, with the same measured calm he'd used for everything else that night. They've been waiting for me to locate either you or the vest. I placed the call 20 minutes ago, when I was in the kitchen, making the soup. He looked at the man on the floor without particular expression. The two agents outside have been on the street since I brought you through the front door. Lydia sat back on her heels and stared at him. You already knew they'd send someone tonight. I suspected the surveillance had accelerated, yes. He tilted his head slightly. I brought you inside because you and the dog needed help. I won't pretend it wasn't also strategic. Kincaid has been watching this house for months. Once you were here, he would move. A pause. He moved. The front door opened. Two people in federal windbreakers entered, assessed the hallway, and separated. One to the radio, one to the operative with zip restraints. Lydia stood slowly, her arms burning. From the front room, Aegis gave a single sharp bark, alert, not afraid, and she went to him. The forensic technician arrived 22 minutes later. His name was Robert Shen, and he carried a hard-sided case and moved with the economical quiet of someone who has spent a career working confined spaces under pressure. He neutralized the compound in the harness lining with a kit that looked purpose-built for exactly this. He removed the memory module with a tool Lydia had never seen before and confirmed the module's integrity in under 9 minutes. He handed it to the senior special counsel agent, who placed it in an evidence case and said nothing. Then Robert Shen shifted his full attention to Aegis, the way someone shifts gears, complete and immediate. 40 minutes, he told Lydia. The compound exposure is serious, but it's not irreversible. Go eat something. You look like you're about to fall through the floor. She didn't fall. She sat in the kitchen with her back to the wall where she could see both doors, ate the rest of the vegetable soup cold from the pot, and listened to Edmund on the telephone in the next room. His cell this time, not the radio, calling people whose names she recognized from congressional briefings and Senate confirmation hearings. His voice, throughout, remained the same, dry, certain, the voice of a man who has been waiting a very long time to make a very specific set of phone calls. At 2:15 in the morning, Robert Shen came to the kitchen doorway. He's stable, he said. His body needs a few weeks to clear the residual compound, 3 at most, but his vitals are better than they were an hour ago, and his organ function is where it needs to be. He paused. The leg's a separate conversation. He needs a proper orthopedic workup when you're somewhere settled. Lydia pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and held them there. Thank you, she said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. Robert Shen nodded once and went back to his case. 51 days later, Colonel Stuart Kincaid was arrested in the parking structure of the Pentagon by a joint team from the DOJ Inspector General's office and the FBI. The memory module extracted from Aegis's harness provided 37 gigabytes of compound sensor data, embedded video, and atmospheric readings consistent with the presence of financial documents and the DNA of 3 individuals whose profiles matched persons reported missing in connection with Operation Crossbar. Combined with the files Claire Foley had assembled before her death, the indictment took 4 days to build. Kincaid was charged with embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was stripped of his rank in a proceeding that lasted 11 minutes. His face, when they led him out of the building in handcuffs, was photographed by 11 different cameras, and the images ran in every major outlet by evening. The operative Lydia had disarmed in Edmund Foley's hallway, eventually identified himself as a former private military contractor with a sealed record and no documented connection to anyone still in uniform. He received his own separate set of charges and stopped speaking after his first arraignment. Lydia's dishonorable discharge was reviewed, then vacated, then replaced with an honorable separation with full commendation. Her back pay arrived as a direct deposit on a Tuesday morning, and she looked at the number on the screen for a long time before it registered as real. She was standing in Edmund Foley's front room when the official documentation arrived by courier. The packet included, clipped to the back of her reinstatement paperwork, a single-page form from the Department of the Air Force, signed in blue ink by a contracting officer she'd never heard of in language that took her 3 readings to trust. Transfer of K9 Unit Aegis to former handler Sergeant Lydia Crane, permanent and unconditional. Aegis was asleep by the radiator in a patch of pale winter sun, his injured leg stretched out straight, his breathing steady and slow. He'd gained 5 pounds. His coat had begun to show gloss again. He'd started doing the thing he used to do in Kandahar, lifting his head to sweep the room every 20 minutes or so, not from anxiety but from the old competence, the habit of a dog who knows his work and loves it. Edmund came into the room with 2 cups of coffee, strong and black, no offer of alternatives, and settled into his chair. "Well," he said. Lydia held up the transfer form. Edmund looked at it for a moment. Something moved across his face. Private and brief and real. Not performance. Not the controlled neutrality he wore for everything else. Something that had been waiting a long time to surface. "Good." He set his coffee down. "The guest room on the 2nd floor gets the morning sun if that matters to you. Robert Shen has offered to do Aegis's orthopedic workup as a professional courtesy. He has a contact at OHU's veterinary department. Thursday, if that works." Lydia looked around the room. The photographs of Claire Foley at every age, laughing in a dozen different places. The folded flag in the triangular glass case on the mantel. The 2 Douglas firs brushing against the windows in the early wind. The amber warmth that had reached through the worst November of her life and pulled her in off the street. "You're not asking me," she said. "I'm not asking you." Edmund picked up his coffee. "My daughter used to say that people who have spent long enough running develop a very efficient allergy to staying still." He glanced down at Aegis, who had lifted his head to look at both of them with the calm, amber patience that had carried him across Kandahar and Djibouti and 11 months of American back roads. But that dog has already made his own assessment of this house. As if to confirm it, Aegis dropped his chin back onto his forepaws and exhaled, long and slow and complete, the way dogs breathe when they have decided, without reservation or condition, that they are home. Lydia sat down on the floor beside him. She put her hand on his back and felt his ribs rise and fall beneath her palm. "Steady, finally, genuinely steady." "Thursday works," she said.